achieved.
I'm a little bit angry, but more so I feel a little bit cheated. And I feel cheated by, of all people, DraftKings. DraftKings is a one-night fantasy sports company that is really turning the world on its head as far as fantasy sports is concerned. There's a number of other companies, but they've really got the lead in it. They're associated with a number of different organizations, including the UFC, and I actually worked in an affiliation with them as well. And I promoted them several times. You've probably heard if you're a regular listener. But I'm pissed off as to what they did to me last weekend. Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. Always, I am your host, Scott Johnson. And we're breaking down the upcoming UFC Fight Night 67 event, which will take place on May 30th. I've got 6 main card predictions on this episode of the show. All of my preliminary breakdowns will be at kamikazeoverdrive.net. I am a little bit under the weather, so I try to condense things down a little bit, but I do still want to rant about something that makes me angry. Last weekend, I picked my 5 fighters. If you're not aware of how DraftKings works, you get a salary, you get some money to spend on fighters. They're valued based on what they think, how well they think they're going to do. You build your roster of 5 fighters. You hope for finishes. And the unfortunate thing is I put my roster together, and then I went to check right before the show started and found out the Rose Namajunas fight had been pulled. She was one of my picks, and the unfortunate thing is the event got pushed back to 7 o'clock, but they locked it in at 6:30, the original start time. And here I am with Namajunas not going to get me any points locked into my roster, and that's absolute bullshit because there was no mention on the site, and I had to go to some of the other sites I follow to see it, posted somewhere on the site that the fight had been called off because their opponent Nina Nasarov had been pulled out with an illness. So I messaged DraftKings and said, "Look, I've got this fighter on my roster. We still have, at the time, 25 minutes before the actual event starts. Unlock it so people can go in and make that change." They said, "No, the fight's locked. It's our policy, blah, blah, blah." I said, "I want a refund then." They said, "No, we can't do that either." So I think it was kind of bullshit that they did that to me, and did it to several other people. I'm sure if you played DraftKings, Rose was probably a popular pick because of their finishing ability, and they kind of screwed you over. In the end, it didn't cost me that much because I didn't have that great a night other than a couple of my picks. But the important thing is, the crux of it is, I feel kind of cheated on their part. I know that's their rules, but I think they can make adjustments in that situation. They expect us to follow along and make sure we know which fighters are still fighting right before the fight starts. They need to make sure they know what time the card starts and allow us to have the most opportunity to do well. Rant over, angry, but I'll get over it. Before I head into my first set of predictions, remember my bet packs are available for $10 for the final card of May. And let's get to the first prediction. Okie dokie. Our first fight of the night takes place in the UFC's welterweight division as Wendell Oliveira, 24-8-0, battles UFC debutant Darren Till, currently undefeated with a record of 12 wins and no losses. Now, this fight was originally scheduled to take place between Oliveira and TJ Wahlberger back at a previous event. Unfortunately, it was scrapped at the last moment. Wahlberger had to pull out. They rescheduled it for this card, and again, Wahlberger had to pull out for undisclosed reasons, and Darren Till gets the call to step in and make his debut. Interestingly with Darren Till, he's English born, but he trains out of Brazil, so he's very familiar with the local scene. Most likely he will still come in as the crowd, as the enemy soil, quote unquote, because they'll see the other fighter as being the local, actual true born Brazilian, and they'll probably support him. So it should be a hostile environment for the Englishman. Originally, as I said, with Wahlberger involved, this fight was striker and Oliveira versus grappler and Wahlberger. Now what we have is a striker versus striker contest, and both guys should enjoy that. For Oliveira, he's primarily a boxer. 11 wins have come by knockout, but interestingly enough, he's also a perfect 10-0 in decisions, which tells us he can go the distance with opponents, do enough to get the win, and despite his heavily muscled physique, it appears he's still capable of fighting a full 3 rounds. Some concerning numbers on his record, though. He does have 3 losses by knockout, including his debut, where he got knocked out in the first round. He also is 3-4 in fights ended by submission. That probably won't rear its ugly head in this matchup, but hey, you never know. For Till, as I said, he's undefeated. He has 8 wins by knockout. He, as I said, is also primarily a striker. He does have 2 submission wins and 2 wins by decision, so for the most part, he finishes his opposition. Now, the Brit is primarily a kicker. His hands are used primarily for counter-striking. He likes to kick from distance, and that's where his, when he initially engages, that's the weapon he's going to use. For Oliveira, he likes to counter-strike as well, which could create some interesting dynamics here, but he is primarily a boxer, likes to use his hands. I would be very shocked if this fight hits the mat. I'm not saying it can't happen, but, I expect him to trade on the feet. A couple nice things for the Brazilian. He does have that debut performance under his belt. He also has a market experience advantage both in overall fights and quality of fights. And, for the most part, Till has faced lower-level competition. This is taking this fight on short notice, and is also making his debut in enemy territory for the most part, which are all difficult things to deal with. I do like Oliveira's power. His success in longer fights also is kind of encouraging. This could very well be a barn burner if these guys both come in looking to slug it out and finish the each other. But it could also be a snooze fest if they both lock in his counter-strikers and look to pot-shot their way to victory. I expect to see Oliveira get on the inside, kind of nullify the kicks of Till, use his hands, use his speed, use his power, and my prediction is Wendell Oliveira to defeat Darren Till by knockout. Fight number 2 in the main card is a fight I'm really looking forward to. It takes place in the UFC's lightweight division as Francisco Massaranduba Trinaldo, 16-4-0, will certainly have the home crowd behind him as he takes on Norman Parke, currently with a record that is not listed on the UFC website, which is lovely. Both guys are trying to break into the upper echelon of the division. They seem to have winning streaks and success, and then they suffer setbacks when they take that next step up, and they simply cannot break into that top 15 to 20, or at least get an opportunity to fight one of those guys. You know, with a win here, that could very well materialize, or they could continue fighting fringe fighters in the top, 20 to 25, 30. Parke is coming off a tough loss, was a split decision loss against another Brazilian in Gleison Tibau. For Trinaldo, he also lost to Tibau way back in 2012. Now, the Brazilian is coming off back-to-back wins. These guys are kind of in different places for the most part. But his last loss did come against Ultimate Fighter winner Michael Chiesa. So this is not, unfamiliar territory for Trinaldo taking on Ultimate Fighter champions. For Parke, this is his second fight in Brazil. He fought Leonardo Santos, another tough winner, and that fight went to a draw. He lost a point for a controversial short scrab that was, right away, boom, point lost. That if it had been the other way around, a Brazilian doing it, I doubt the point would have been taken away. Either way, getting that opportunity to fight in Brazil, experience that, it's a good experience to build on heading into this matchup. He knows what to expect, and he's had some success, even though it wasn't a great performance on his part. Physically, Trinaldo is a hulking physical specimen, big individual. But Parke, 3 inches taller, but Trinaldo will have a 1-inch reach advantage. We do know there are issues with Trinaldo being so big. We'll talk about them momentarily. Statistically, Parke lands more than 1 strike more per minute than Trinaldo, so that's big. He fights at a heavier, stronger pace, which isn't that shocking. Trinaldo has slight edge defensively, but it's fairly minimal as far as how often he gets hit. Parke should have the better striking repertoire, superior work rate, and as the fight progresses, I expect him to pull away from Francisco Trinaldo. Additionally, the Brazilian has proven very vulnerable to being taken down. Leandro Silva took him down 4 times, Chiesa took him down a couple times and was incredibly heavy on top and just kept him stuck there on the mat. Parke is a black belt in judo, and he also has a background in freestyle wrestling, so he's a very good grappling acumen. 1.97 takedowns at a 25% completion rate. Not huge numbers, but I expect him to be aggressive with his wrestling. We did see a big wrestling performance from him against Colin Fletcher when he won the Ultimate Fighter. I think we could see a little bit more of that in this matchup, but at the same time, he might look to use his striking and try and outwork his opponent. Trinaldo has used his ground game effectively in the past. He trains with Sergio Moraes, who's a very good grappler, a top-level BJJ fighter. We saw him ground Akbar Areola in his last fight and control him, but Parke is very hard to take down. Gleison Tibau, who has excellent wrestling, is a big man, took him down twice on 6 attempts, and overall Parke's got an 87% takedown defense. So I give the edge there to Parke in the grappling department. One thing, though, not finishing a Brazilian in Brazil can lead to some questionable and head-scratching decisions. That's always a risk you run when you're fighting there. We already know that. Parke already knows that firsthand. But I think he should be far and away the more active fighter, both on the feet and on the mat, especially as Trinaldo fades potentially in the later half of the second round into the third round if Parke can really put it on him early on. Norman Parke needs a big performance here, but my prediction is Norman Parke to defeat Francisco Trinaldo by decision. Fight number 3 in the main card, we're heading to the UFC's light heavyweight division, which as of last weekend has a brand new champion. In this fight, guys that are a little bit away from that, and I use air quotes, Francimar Barroso, 16-4-0, takes on Canadian Ryan the Big Deal Jimmo with a current record of 19 wins and 4 losses. Now, neither man has looked overly strong in the UFC. Barroso has just 2 fights, and he's 1-1 so far. He's coming up a split decision loss to Hans Stringer. For Jimmo, he's 3-3, having alternated wins and losses over that run. It seems like every time he has success and wins a fight, he gets a step up and obviously loses that next matchup. Based on that pattern, he is due for a win here. We'll see if that holds true. Both guys are coming off significant layoffs. Jimmo is just short of a year out of the cage, coming off a broken arm he suffered against Oven St. Preux in that matchup. For Barroso, hasn't fought in roughly 13 months, so both guys about the same time out of the cage. We'll see if that affects either one. For Jimmo, black belt in karate. You can really see it in his stance. He's up on the balls of his feet, really bouncing around. Kind of an unorthodox approach to striking. For a big man, he moves pretty darn well. 8 wins by knockout. He has been knocked out twice as well in his career. He's 2-1 in fights ended by submission, and just as important, 9-1 in fights when they go the distance. So he knows how to win with the judges. When the judges get involved, he is able to fight a full 3 rounds. He has only gone the distance once in the UFC, which kind of runs contrary to what most people expected, as he was kind of a point fighter. Had that. People talked about him being a point fighter coming into the UFC, and he's had some impressive knockouts. so far in his run. For Barroso, he's a BJJ and kickboxing black belt, Novo União trained, so you definitely look to him trying to work some wrestling in to this matchup. Also, obviously, a very good striking camp. 8 wins by knockout, 6 wins by submission. He's 2-1 decisions. He does have 3 losses by knockout, so that is a little bit concerning. He only has had 6 fights in his entire career go beyond the first round, which tells me that if this fight goes longer, he could be in some serious trouble. In his last fight, we saw Barroso struggle with activity. Couldn't hold top control when he scored takedowns against Stringer, and that was a big issue. He routinely was pinned on the wall and got stuck. He had to rely on the referee to break that up, which could most likely happen here as the fans will boo with the Brazilian with his back against the cage. And he was clearly slowing down in that fight. His hands were low. He was throwing a lot of single strikes and looked exhausted, and that's something Ryan Jimmo is going to look to exploit. He's known for kind of a grinding style, works the clinch a lot. He has shown power in the UFC, but he's capable of really outpointing guys. He has a good kicking game, stays on the balls with his feet, as I mentioned, works in and out. It should give him an advantage over the more flat-footed opponent, who's going to be a little more stationary, especially as the fight progresses. Up next, we head to the UFC's welterweight division. Jimmo has a market advantage in strikes landed per minute as a better pace. He should have the cardio advantage as well, and the heat could be a factor. I think that cost Barroso in his last matchup as Brazilian arenas are traditional. Traditionally have issues fighting on the main card. Heat is a lot of them don't have air conditioning. His style of point fighting could be costly in Brazil, especially if he's not active enough. I think he knows how to get the job done. He needs to remain as busy as possible early on to really take advantage of that slowdown in the second half. I think Jimmo grinds Barroso early, slows him down, lands something big. In my prediction is Ryan Jimmo to defeat Francimar Barroso by knockout. Nunes is undefeated in his last 3, which is interesting. No contest versus Darren Cruikshank. His last fight kind of masked that a little bit, but he did knock out Sam Stout. And for a guy that was on the verge of calling it quits and seemed disinterested in fighting in MMA when the Strikeforce closure happened, he's done fairly well for himself in the last little bit. For Oliveira, he's coming off a heartbreaking loss in his debut. He replaced an injured Josh Thompson on relatively short notice, took on a very hyped Gilbert Burns, and he was a heavy underdog. And he was winning that fight heading into the third round, and he had dominated with the striking against a grappling-oriented fighter who a lot of people were talking about. And unfortunately, he was submitted inside the final minute, forcing him to give up. I think it was an arm bar that eventually caught him, losing a fight that he would have won had it gone to the judges. But yet again, he finds himself stepping in for an injured fighter, Jean Cabral, forced to pull out of this matchup. So Oliveira gets the nod. Physically, Oliveira 1 inch taller, but he'll have a 4-inch reach advantage over Nunes. Now, what we have here is primarily a striker versus striker, so we could be in for some fireworks. Nunes a boxer, Oliveira a kickboxer. Nunes, 9 of his 13 wins have come by knockout, lands 3.82 strikes landed per minute. But interesting enough, he gives up the exact same amount to his opposition, so his numbers are not that great as far as, he's got a 0 striking exchange rate, so he gets hit as much as he hits, which isn't a good thing when your primary mode of attack is striking. Now, he is a good striker, but for the most part, as the way I look at it, he's fairly overhyped. He has capable hands, but he needs to be more diverse. He's tried that a little bit of late, but still, it's not his strong suit. Now, keep in mind, despite the fact that his prowess is striking, he has lost striking-based fights before. Jorge Masvidal and Donald Cerrone both lit him up on the feet. And against the Darren Cruikshank fight prior to the stoppage, he was getting lit up. Or outclassed, let's say that. For Oliveira, he's an accomplished kickboxer. 8 of his 10 wins have come by knockout. He looked very good against Gilbert Burns. He defended the takedowns exceptionally well, unloaded with the strikes very fluidly, worked his combinations, used excellent angles, stayed very busy, hurt Burns a couple times, showed good power, good composure, though not overextending himself. Unfortunately, got caught in that final round. Both guys should benefit in this matchup from not fighting a grappling-based opponent who's going to look to take him down at every opportunity. I like Oliveira's diversity, his use of kicks, and his reach to keep Nunes on the outside and out of his comfortable boxing range. Nunes could look to use some wrestling to change gears. We have seen him try that a little bit in the past, but I think Burns, Burns had a minimal success against Oliveira taking him down, so I don't expect to see Nunes do that unless Oliveira completely falls asleep on any opportunity. I think Nunes will stick around. He'll take his punishment, but in a similar fashion to some of his other fighters against guys who are more kickboxing-oriented fighters, I think he will be outclassed. So my prediction is Alex Oliveira to defeat KJ Nunes. I'll take Oliveira by decision. We move now to the co-main event of the night. It takes place in the UFC's featherweight division. It should be a very good matchup. It's the number 8th ranked Nick the Carney Lentz, 27-6-2 with 1 no contest. Battles the number 9th ranked Charles Del Bronx Oliveira, currently holding a record of 19 wins, 4 losses, and 1 no contest. And interestingly enough, that 1 no contest was against each other, and that's how they got it. This is a rematch from a 2011 matchup that was ruled a no contest after Oliveira landed an illegal knee that eventually led to a rear naked choke win that the referee dismissed, and eventually was reviewed and overturned as it should be. And keep in mind, that fight took place at lightweight. Now, this bout was rescheduled to take place in September 2014. Oliveira came in overweight and eventually was pulled after getting sick from cutting weight, and now we've got it rescheduled here. Hopefully no issues there, as Oliveira has made weight successfully a number of times since. Since their first fight, Oliveira has gone 5-3 overall, but since cutting down to 145 pounds, he's 5-2, so that's a pretty solid run. For Lentz, he's 4-3 since their last matchup, but the same thing, since going to featherweight, he's 4-1. with his lone loss coming against top-ranked Chad Mendes. So both guys have been fairly impressive since going to 145 pounds. Now, Lentz, this is a big thing for him. He's heading to Brazil for the third time in his career. He's already 2-0 fighting on enemy territory, wins over Hakran Diaz and Diego Nunes. So two pretty capable fighters that he's come into their backyard and defeated them. For Oliveira, in their first matchup, he was very focused on getting the fight to the mat, but interestingly enough, he was winning the striking exchanges. He scored a nice counter left hook knockdown. He was really having a lot of success against Nick Lentz on the feet, but again, his primary focus seemed to constantly be get the fight to the ground, whether it be on his back or on top position, and work his submission game. On the mat, the Brazilian was winning the majority of the scrambles, countering Lentz's takedown game and, getting to a superior position. And the big thing is when you counter a wrestler and get the advantage on the mat, you're taking away his primary weapon, and that really can create some issues. Physically, Oliveira, 2-inch height advantage, 6-inch reach advantage, so he definitely has some length on his opposition. Since their last fight, both guys have made some marked improvements, and that's why they're climbing the featherweight ranks. Lentz has worked on his striking. He stays very active and is very effective in a grinding, scrappy type way. But for Oliveira, he is still the much more dynamic striker. He has a good kicking game, solid hands, uses his reach very well. He fights nice and long, works the clinch with knees exceptionally well, and he'll throw anything because he's not afraid to be taken down. If he'll throw an off-balance attack to try and catch an opponent, sleeping and not expecting it, because if they take him down, he'll work from that position as well. He does have 6 wins by knockout. We haven't seen a single win by knockout in the UFC, but it's still worth knowing he can finish guys on the feet. For Nick Lentz, he's an NCAA Division I wrestler and BJJ purple belt, so a ground-oriented fighter. 10 of his wins have come by submission. He has one loss, which came very early in his career. Obviously not counting the no contest. He's averaged 4.02 takedowns at a 35% completion rate, so pretty solid numbers there. But again, we saw Oliveira's scrambling abilities take away Lentz's best weapon in his last matchup, and it makes that ground uninviting, and it really it's basically cutting a wrestler's leg off if they are an average or so-so striker. If you can't rely on your takedowns to help you out, that's really a big detriment. Oliveira, overall, I think he's done a lot of work to improve his wrestling. We saw him dominate Jeremy Stephens both on the feet and on the mat, scoring takedowns and putting him in positions to use his grappling, even though he did not finish him. The big concern with Lentz is that he was slowing down in that first matchup because Oliveira was constantly pushing. Whether they were grappling or striking, he was in his face, he was hitting him, he was dragging him to the mat, he was countering, and it really was exhausting Nick Lentz. And I think that is something that could show up here. Oliveira does an exceptional job flowing between grappling and striking and back again. He doesn't let his opponent rest, and that's going to be incredibly exhausting. We have seen Nick Lentz in the Hakran Diaz fight slow down a little bit in the later stages, and I think Oliveira has the ability to do that even quicker. Now, there is a risk of Lentz fending off Oliveira's sub-attempts and spending the majority of the fight on top. We did see Hatsu Aoki have success with doing that to Oliveira until Oliveira caught him, gaining that positional advantage. Unfortunately for the American, it seems like it's a very limited path to victory, and his wrestling almost becomes a liability in this fight. Oliveira, 6 of his 7 wins have come by submission. I expect he's either going to hurt Lentz on the feet, or the heat and pace will slow the American down to the point where Oliveira can capitalize. And my prediction is Charles Oliveira to defeat Nick Lentz by submission. In the main event of the evening, we're in the UFC's welterweight division, in a fight that a couple years ago would have been fantastic, and it should still be should be awesome now, and nonetheless, as the returning number 4 ranked Carlos, the natural-born killer Condit, 29-8-0, battles number 12th ranked Thiago Pitbull Alves, currently the record of 26-9-0, both guys former title challengers, Condit former WEC champion and former interim UFC champion. Now, Condit's coming in after a long layoff. He's been out of action for about 14 months, suffered a pretty nasty injury. I think it was an ACL tear against Tyrone Woodley, has been on the shelf recouping that. For Alves, this is the quickest turnaround he's had in a while, as it's just 4 months since his last fight. Prior to that, he had a couple years off and really kind of disappeared, and people forgot about him for the most part. Now, for Condit, despite being a veteran fighter with a ton of experience, this is his first fight he's ever made the trip to go down to Brazil to take on. For Alves, interestingly enough, he is Brazilian, but this is the first fight he's had at home since 2003, which is the 5th pro fight of his career, so he's been fighting abroad ever since, so it should be a fairly exciting homecoming. Hopefully we don't see him get too, enjoy the spotlight too much and forget to focus on the fight. Physically, Condit, 5-inch height advantage, 5-inch reach advantage, a very long and lean fighter for the division. He's also 1 year younger, so the guys relatively the same age. Have a lot of experience, though, for guys that are in their very early 30s. Now, both guys have big knockout numbers. Alves 12-1 in fights that are ended by knockout, and Condit equally as impressive, 14-1. Alves' knockout was an up kick at the hands of John Fitch. Condit's knockout, of course, the injury that he suffered against Tyrone Woodley, so not really a knockout in that sense. But at the same time, Carlos Condit's last knockout came way back in 2011 when he caught Dong Young Kim with a flying knee, which was the 3rd of 3 consecutive knockouts, preceded by wins over Dan Hardy and Rory McDonald, but he's gone a long time since knocking an opponent out. For Alves, he's coming off a big knockout win when he took out Jordan Mean with a vicious body kick. Before that, you have to go all the way back to UFC 85 when he stopped Matt Hughes, and that's 85, not 185, when he stopped Matt Hughes which was the end of a 5-fight streak where he knocked out 5 consecutive opponents, which is a pretty darn impressive streak, and that eventually led to him getting a title shot. Now, Condit also has very good submission numbers, 13 wins by submission, but again, we keep saying this, none since WEC 32 when he submitted Carlo Prater. That's 11 fights ago, so he hasn't really been finishing a lot of his opponents in recent memory. For Alves, a BJJ brown belt, 2-4 in fights ended by submission, so a little bit concerning there if Condit can take him down. He is 7-4 in fights that go the distance, compared to Condit, who's 2-4 when when judges are involved, which is a little bit disheartening considering the caliber of opponent, he's the caliber of fighter he really is. Now, neither guy has massive wrestling numbers. We have seen Alves look for takedowns of late, and Condit is quite susceptible to being taken down. He is nasty off his back, but we could see maybe Alves trying to change things up and score takedowns. That is a possibility. But where their bread and butter is both guys are exceptional Muay Thai practitioner. I like Alves to be a little bit more technical, but Condit is no slouch, and he is a nasty striker. Now, Alves did have some trouble with the length of Jordan Mean in his last fight, especially in that first round. He found his range a little bit better in the second round, eventually got the body kick to finish that matchup off in impressive fashion. And that's one thing Alves is known for. He has an exceptional kicking game. Nasty, nasty leg kicks. Turns his hip over exceptionally well. Gets that thud, not a slap, which means it really, as Goldie always tells us, really makes a nice impact. If he lands one, it can really damage an opponent. And keep in mind, Condit is coming off a nasty leg injury. How will it hold up if Alves starts thudding big shots into his leg? Is it going to wear him out? For Condit, he has a good kicking game here. We'll see a nice switch kick to the head, which is really solid. A body kick we'll see as well. He'll go low. We used that a lot against Nick Diaz in that victory. He has excellent hands. He uses his knees and elbows exceptionally well as well. And he'll work in the tie clinch. And I expect to see if he does that, he'll use his leverage because he has the height advantage to really tie up, control, and do damage to the much shorter Thiago Alves. Now, there is a cardio concern in this matchup. Alves has had cardio issues in the past. He's only gone 5 rounds once. That was with the champion George St. Pierre, which was obviously in a losing effort. For Condit, he has gone 4 or more rounds in 3 of his last 5 fights, and he has shown he can do that. And he's got a lot of heart. We saw against Rory McDonald, he lost the majority of that fight, rallied back to win it very late in that matchup. So the guy has a lot of heart and determination. If Condit can break him down with pressure, he could take complete control of this matchup and very easily stop it, especially in the second half if Alves does gas out. But keep in mind, when Alves fought Seth Baczynski, he looked exceptional, and his cardio looked very good for 3 rounds, and he put a beating on Baczynski. And now he's fighting on a normal schedule. I expect him to be better physically. He's not coming in off a massive layoff. I don't like the fact that Condit's coming off an injury. I don't like the fact he's coming off a long layoff. I don't like the fact he's fighting in unfamiliar territory. And I think Alves is going to target those legs with his massive kicking game. I think he'll have a slight speed advantage over Condit, who sometimes tends to come up a little bit short with his striking despite his massive reach. I think Alves, as I said, targets his legs, does damage, and my prediction is Thiago Alves to defeat Carlos Condit. I'll take Alves by decision. So those are my 6 main card predictions for the UFC Fight Night 67 event. All of my preliminary picks will be available at kamikazeoverdrive.net. The betting panel will also be, or the prediction panel will also be there, so check them out. My bet pack will also be posted. It's the last for the month. Hopefully we'll turn things around a little bit. I took a couple risks on this card. Obviously the main event, I'm taking the underdog. I have to still establish and look at the prelims. It's a busy week for me. I'm trying to get some things sorted out. Nonetheless, thanks as always for listening, guys, and I think we have an event next weekend, shockingly enough, so let's get to it. Take care, guys.